The tin-type photograph arrived at the Austin Historical Archive in a cardboard box filled with donated estate materials. Archivist Daniel Hayes lifted it carefully from the protective wrapping, his eyes immediately drawn to the striking image. A cowboy stood in front of a weathered barn somewhere in West Texas, his Winchester rifle held proudly across his chest. The date scratched on the back reads simply, Summer 1880. The photograph showed remarkable clarity for its age. The cowboy appeared to be in his 30s, wearing a dark hat, cotton shirt, and leather vest. His expression was neutral, almost proud, as he displayed his weapon for the camera. The rifle itself was a Winchester Model 1873, recognizable by its distinctive brass receiver that gleamed even in the faded image. Daniel began his standard documentation process, photographing the tin type from multiple angles under proper lighting. As he adjusted his macro lens to capture the fine details, something on the rifle's barrel caught his attention. He leaned closer, squinting at what appeared to be markings etched into the metal just below the front sight. Using a high-powered magnifying glass, Daniel examined the marks more carefully. They weren't manufacturer stamps or serial numbers. These were crude etchings, deliberately carved into the barrel by hand. He counted them slowly, his pulse quickening with each mark. 12 distinct notches, each approximately the same size, running in a neat line along the top of the barrel. Daniel had studied frontier weapons for 15 years. Notched gun barrels weren't uncommon among lawmen and outlaws alike. Each mark typically represented a kill. But 12 notches suggested something extraordinary, either a deadly gunfighter or a prolific murderer. He reached for his phone to call the Texas Rangers Historical Research Center. If this rifle had claimed 12 lives, there would be records. There had to be. The question was, who had this man killed and why? Captain Maria Gonzalez from the Texas Rangers. Historical Research Center arrived the next morning with 3 boxes of archived case files from 1879 to 1881. She spread the yellowed documents across Daniel's examination table, her expression grave. Over the past 24 hours, she discovered something disturbing in the old reports. Between October 1879 and August 1880, 12 men had been shot and killed across a 300-mile stretch of West Texas. Each victim had been killed with a single rifle shot from long range, some at distances exceeding 200 yards. The precision suggested an expert marksman, someone with military training or extensive hunting experience. The victims appeared random at first: ranch hands, a store owner, 2 cattle buyers, a telegraph operator, a freight wagon driver, 3 miners, a gambler, and a preacher. They'd been killed in different towns and settlements, with weeks sometimes passing between murders. Local sheriffs had investigated each death independently, never realizing they were connected, but one Texas Ranger had suspected a pattern. Captain William Fletcher had been tracking the murders, noting the similarities in his personal journal. Each victim had been shot during daylight hours, always from elevated positions, always with a single kill shot. Fletcher had documented the locations, the trajectories, and the estimated caliber of .44 to .40 Winchester round, the most common rifle ammunition of the era. Daniel examined Fletcher's hand-drawn maps showing the murder locations. They formed a rough arc across West Texas, starting near El Paso and moving eastward toward San Antonio. The killer had been methodical, moving through the territory systematically, never striking in the same area twice. Did Fletcher ever identify a suspect? Daniel asked. Maria's face darkened. He was close. His last journal entry mentions interviewing a cowboy who'd been seen near 3 of the murder sites. But before Fletcher could make an arrest, he was killed shot from long range while riding between towns. September 1880. The murders stopped after that. Daniel felt his stomach tighten as he looked back at the photograph. Daniel contacted Marcus Webb, a firearms historian specializing in frontier-era weapons. Marcus arrived from Dallas 2 days later, bringing reference materials and examination equipment. He studied the photograph under multiple light sources, measuring and documenting every visible detail of the Winchester rifle. "This is definitely a Model 1873, Marcus confirmed, pointing to specific features. "You can see the brass receiver here and the distinctive lever action. These were incredibly popular in the West. Over 700,000 were manufactured. But this particular rifle has some unique characteristics." He indicated several areas on the weapon. The stock showed custom carving, intricate designs that suggested the owner took pride in his weapon. The barrel had been modified slightly. The front sight filed down for more precise long-range shooting. And those 12 notches were carved deep enough to be permanent, each one representing something significant to the owner. Marcus pulled out historical sales records from Winchester. The company kept detailed shipping logs. "If we can identify any unique serial numbers or retailer marks visible in the photograph, we might be able to trace this specific rifle's purchase history." Using digital enhancement, they examined every inch of the weapon in the image. On the rifle's receiver, barely visible in the original tin type but clear under magnification, were faint markings. Marcus compared them against his database of Winchester serial numbers and retailer stamps. "Got it," he said after 20 minutes of searching. "This rifle was sold in El Paso in June 1879 to a buyer listed only as J. Carter. The retailer noted that the customer paid in gold coins and requested modifications, specifically adjustments to the sights for long-distance accuracy." Daniel and Maria exchanged glances. The first murder had occurred in October 1879, 4 months after the rifle was purchased, and it had happened just outside El Paso. The buyer had immediately begun using his precisely modified weapon, exactly as intended for killing from a distance. Now they needed to discover who J. Carter really was. Maria spent 3 days cross-referencing the 12 victims' backgrounds, searching for any connection that might explain why they'd been targeted. Daniel assisted, combing through newspaper archives, census records, and court documents from the late 1870s. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a lawsuit filed in El Paso County Court in 1877. A rancher named Joseph Carter had sued 12 men for theft and fraud. According to the court documents, Carter had hired them to drive a herd of 200 cattle from his ranch near El Paso to the railhead in San Antonio. The men had been paid half their wages up front, with the remainder promised upon delivery. The cattle never arrived. The 12 drovers claimed they'd been attacked by Comanche raiders who'd scattered the herd. They'd barely escaped with their lives, they said, and the cattle were lost. Carter accused them of selling the cattle themselves and pocketing the money, a scheme worth nearly $8,000. His entire life savings invested in that herd. The judge had ruled against Carter. Without evidence of the alleged sale, and with all 12 drovers corroborating the Comanche attack story, the court dismissed the case. Carter had been ordered to pay the drovers the remaining wages plus court costs. The ruling had bankrupted him, forcing him to sell his ranch to cover the debts. Daniel compared the names from the lawsuit to the murder victims list. Every single name matched. The 12 men who'd been systematically shot and killed between 1879 and 1880 were the same 12. Drovers who testified against Joseph Carter. 1877. Carter spent 2 years planning this, Maria said quietly. He bought that Winchester, modified it for accuracy, and then hunted down every man who destroyed his life, one by one, across 300 miles of Texas. But there was still a crucial question. Was the man in the photograph Joseph Carter himself, proudly displaying the weapon of his revenge? Daniel tracked down the descendants of Samuel Price, a traveling photographer who'd worked the Texas circuit in the 1880s. Price's great-great-granddaughter, Helen, lived in a retirement community in Fort Worth. She possessed her ancestors' business ledgers and a trunk full of his correspondence. Helen welcomed Daniel and Maria into her small apartment, clearly excited by their interest in her family history. She'd spent years preserving Samuel Price's materials, hoping someone would appreciate their historical value. The ledgers were remarkably detailed, listing every photograph taken, the subject's name when known, and the location. Daniel's hands trembled as he turned the pages, searching for entries from summer 1880. There, August 14th, 1880. Outside Fredericksburg. Cowboy portrait, 50 cents. Subject declined to give name. Insisted on holding his rifle. Paid extra for 2 copies. Helen produced a leather-bound journal from the trunk. Grandfather Samuel kept personal notes about interesting subjects. He was a keen observer of people. The entry for August 14th was longer than most. Photographed a strange fellow today. He came to my wagon specifically requesting a portrait with his rifle. Mid-30s, quiet, with eyes that had seen hard things. The rifle was pristine, well-maintained, but I noticed marks on the barrel, deliberate carvings. When I asked about them, he smiled for the first time. Memories, he said. 12 memories of justice served. His tone made my blood run cold. He paid in gold coins, took both copies, and left without another word. Something about him suggested violence carefully controlled. I was relieved to see him ride away. Maria leaned forward. Did your ancestor mention what direction the man rode? Helen flipped through several more pages. Yes, here. Samuel noted that the man headed southeast toward San Antonio. And he wrote something else. She read aloud. I later learned that a Texas Ranger was killed near here last month, shot from ambush. I cannot help but wonder about my strange customer and his 12 memories. Daniel felt the pieces falling into place. Maria obtained access to historical land office records for El Paso County. Joseph Carter's ranch. The Bar C had been registered in his name from 1872 until its forced sale in 1878. Property records included a detailed description filed when Carter first claimed the land. Joseph Michael Carter, age 28, formerly a sharpshooter with the 5th Texas Infantry during the war between the states, seeking to establish cattle operation. A sharpshooter. The term confirmed what the murder patterns had suggested. The killer had military training, specifically in long-range precision shooting. During the Civil War, Confederate sharpshooters had been legendary for their ability to hit targets at extreme distances, often picking off Union officers from positions hundreds of yards away. Daniel researched Carter's military service records at the Texas State Archives. Joseph Carter had served from 1862 to 1865, assigned to a specialized unit that provided cover fire during major engagements. His commanding officer's notes praised his exceptional marksmanship and unwavering patience in waiting for the perfect shot. After the war, Carter had used his mustering out pay to buy land in West Texas, building his ranch from nothing. By 1877, he'd invested everything in that cattle herd, planning to use the profits to expand his operation. The 12 drovers he'd hired had come recommended by a cattle broker in El Paso. Carter had trusted them with his entire future. Maria found a newspaper article from 1878. Shortly after the court case, the El Paso Herald had published a brief item about the ranch sale. The Bar C property has been purchased by the Southwest Cattle Company. The former owner, Mr. Joseph Carter, was seen departing town last week, his possessions loaded on a single wagon. When asked his destination, Carter replied only that he had unfinished business to attend to. Unfinished business. The phrase took on sinister meaning now. Carter had left El Paso in 1878, spent several months preparing, purchasing, and modifying his Winchester, practicing his shooting, locating his targets, and then began his campaign of revenge in October 1879. By August 1880, his business was finished. Maria brought in Texas Ranger historical consultant Robert Hayes to review Captain William Fletcher's original case files. Hayes had spent 30 years studying frontier law enforcement and had written extensively about unsolved crimes from the territorial period. He arrived at the archive with additional materials from Fletcher's personal effects, documents that had remained with the Ranger's family for generations. Fletcher's investigation had been remarkably thorough. He'd created detailed profiles of each victim, noting their movements, associates, and backgrounds. By the sixth murder, in March 1880, Fletcher had identified the pattern. All the victims had worked the same cattle drive in 1877. He tracked down the court records and realized these weren't random killings, they were executions. Fletcher had then begun searching for Joseph Carter. He'd sent telegrams to sheriffs across West Texas, asking if anyone matching Carter's description had been seen in their jurisdictions. Several responses came back positive. A quiet cowboy matching Carter's appearance had been spotted in 4 different towns, always arriving shortly before a murder occurred and leaving immediately after. But Carter was careful. He never stayed in hotels, never used his real name, and never formed connections that might help authorities track him. He moved constantly, living rough between towns, hunting his own food. Fletcher noted, "This man is a ghost. He appears only long enough to kill, then vanishes into the vast territory." Hayes pointed to Fletcher's final entries. Written in late August 1880, the Ranger had received a tip from a bartender in Fredericksburg who'd overheard a man bragging about settling old scores. Fletcher had ridden immediately to Fredericksburg, interviewing the bartender and several witnesses who'd seen the man. The descriptions all matched Carter. Fletcher's last entry, dated September 3, 1880, was chilling. Have confirmed the subject's identity as Joseph Carter, former owner of the Bar C Ranch. He has killed 11 of the 12 drovers. The last man, Edmund Walsh, is believed to be in San Antonio. I am riding to intercept Carter before he completes his vendetta. God willing, I will bring him to justice. Fletcher never made it to San Antonio. His body was found 2 days later. Daniel traveled to San Antonio to search the city's historical archives for information about Edmund Walsh, the 12th name on Carter's list. Walsh had been the leader of the drover crew, the one who'd organized the cattle drive and recruited the other 11 men. He was also the primary witness who testified about the supposed Comanche attack. The San Antonio Express had published Walsh's obituary in September 1880. Edmund Walsh, age 41, killed by unknown assailant. Walsh was found deceased outside his residence on September 8th, shot once through the heart. Sheriff's deputies report no witnesses to the crime. Walsh was a respected cattle buyer and drover with extensive experience on the Chisholm Trail. The obituary failed to mention Walsh's testimony in the 1877 court case, or that he'd been the 11th of 12 men connected to that case to die violently. The San Antonio sheriff had apparently never connected Walsh's death to the string of murders across West Texas. Daniel found something else in the newspaper archives, a small article, published 3 weeks after Walsh's death. A drifter's body had been discovered in the brush country south of San Antonio, dead for approximately 2 weeks. The man had been carrying a Winchester rifle, a bedroll, and a leather satchel containing gold coins. His horse had been found grazing nearby. A cause of death was listed as exposure and dehydration, though the sheriff noted the deceased appeared to have been ill for some time. The body had never been identified. No one claimed it. The man was buried in the county cemetery under a marker reading simply unknown. Maria obtained an exhumation order, and a forensic team carefully excavated the grave. The remains were fragmentary after nearly 145 years, but the personal effects buried with the body had been preserved in the dry Texas soil. Among them was a Winchester Model 1873 rifle, its serial number matching the one sold in El Paso in June 1879. The 12 notches were still visible on the barrel. Joseph Carter's vendetta had been perfect in its execution. He'd tracked down 12 men across hundreds of miles, eliminated them with precision shooting, and evaded law enforcement for nearly a year. But his campaign of revenge had cost him everything, not just his ranch and his future, but ultimately his life. Medical examination of Carter's remains revealed evidence of advanced tuberculosis, a disease that had likely been developing for years. By the time he killed Edmund Walsh in September 1880, completing his mission, Carter was already dying. He'd ridden south, away from San Antonio, seeking empty country where he could face his end alone. The photograph took on new meaning with this knowledge. Carter had posed for that portrait in August 1880, just 2 weeks before killing Walsh. He'd known he was dying. The photograph wasn't just evidence of his crimes, it was his memorial. His way of ensuring that someone, someday, would understand what he'd done and why Daniel arranged for a proper headstone to replace the anonymous marker. It read, Joseph Michael Carter, 1844 to 1880, rancher, soldier, seeker of justice. The wording was deliberately neutral, acknowledging Carter's story without condoning his actions. The photograph and rifle were placed in a special exhibit at the Austin Historical Archive, accompanied by the full story of Carter's vendetta. The display included court documents from the 1877 case, Fletcher's investigation files, and testimonies from the victims' descendants, some of whom believed their ancestors had indeed stolen Carter's cattle, while others maintained the Comanche attack story. Maria stood before the exhibit on opening day, studying Carter's image. Was he a murderer or a victim seeking justice? Daniel had wrestled with that question for months. Maybe he was both. The frontier offered no justice for men like Carter, no appeals, no second chances. The court believed 12 liars over one honest man, and it destroyed him. So he became his own law, his own judge and executioner. The 12 notches on that Winchester barrel represented 12 lives ended, 12 families left grieving. The Carter case sparked renewed interest in frontier justice and the countless unsolved crimes from the 1870s and 1880s. Historians across the Southwest began re-examining old murder files, looking for patterns that had been missed by isolated sheriffs working without modern communication or coordination. 3 more cases emerged with similarities to Carter's vendetta victims, connected by shared crimes, killed systematically over months or years by unknown assailants. In each instance, the murders had stopped abruptly, suggesting the perpetrators had either died, moved on, or achieved their goals. The frontier had been full of such shadow wars, personal conflicts that played out with bullets and blood, far from the eyes of official justice. Daniel published a comprehensive paper on the Carter case in the Journal of Frontier History. He argued that cases like Carter's revealed the fundamental failure of frontier legal systems to protect the innocent or punish the guilty. When courts were corrupt, witnesses could be bought, and evidence was easily fabricated. Men like Carter had faced a choice: accept injustice or seek their own. Carter had chosen revenge. Whether that made him a villain or a tragic figure remained a matter of perspective. The photograph itself became one of the archive's most popular exhibits. Visitors stood before it, studying Carter's neutral expression and the Winchester held across his chest. The 12 notches were clearly visible in the high-resolution display image, each mark representing a life Carter had taken in his quest for retribution. Some visitors expressed sympathy for Carter, seeing him as a victim of a broken system who'd been pushed beyond endurance. Others viewed him as a cold-blooded killer who'd murdered 12 men rather than accepting a legal decision. Most fell somewhere in between, recognizing the moral complexity of a situation where clear heroes and villains didn't exist. For Daniel, the photograph represented something more fundamental, the power of a single image to preserve truth across centuries. Carter had posed for that portrait, knowing he was dying, knowing his story might otherwise be lost. He'd created a record of his actions, evidence that would someday reveal what 12 men had done to him and what he'd done in response. The Winchester rifle, with its 12 notches worn smooth by time, rested in a climate-controlled case beside the photograph. Together, they told a story that transcended simple narratives of good and evil, offering instead a glimpse into the harsh realities of frontier life, where justice was often something a man had to take for himself.